So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Farmstay Ordinance, our second workshop. We'll be getting started here shortly. We got several more registered attendees, so we're waiting, giving them a few extra minutes to start, and we'll be beginning shortly. So thank you. So I think we'll give it one more minute just for some of the late arrivals, and then we'll get started. So thank you for your patience. Okay, well, I think we'll get started here, and those that arrive shortly after, they can attend. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending your evening with us for our Farmstay Ordinance Workshop number 2. My name is David Lackey. I'm Supervising Planner with the Planning and Development Department. And with us this evening, in terms of the staff team, we've got our consultant, MIG, and with us is Joan Chaplick, Tricia Stevens, and Anna Padilla. And we're also fortunate to have with us tonight Jason Johnston from Environmental Health Services, and he'll provide some very helpful and informative information from environmental health perspective and as it relates to Farmstay. So we're looking forward to that. Just a reminder that the meeting tonight is being recorded. And like the first workshop, shortly after the conclusion of the meeting, we'll be working on getting a recording posted to the Farmstay web page, as well as a summary of the comments that we received tonight. So look for that, hopefully maybe by the end of the week or early next week. So with the introductions completed, I'd like to turn it over to Joan Chaplick, who's going to give an overview of tonight's agenda.
Okay, thank you, David. My name's Joan Chaplick. I'll be serving as the moderator and facilitator for tonight's session. Our purpose tonight is to continue to get additional community input into the development of the Farmstay Ordinance. And we want to review the work that's been done to date. And tonight will be your opportunity to make additional comments and to get any questions that you have answered. So we'll be reviewing a summary of our first workshop, which was held the last week of January. That workshop built on a community survey that was done in advance. And David will be sharing the discussion topics that resulted from those two activities. The workshop surfaced a lot of questions that were specific to environmental health services. So we have Jason Johnston with us, who's going to be providing a short presentation and answering questions focused on food service, water, wastewater, and other related questions. And then we'll take questions and comments. So we want to make sure that you're able to participate. We don't just want to have this be a one-way conversation. So please use the chat. If any questions come in, and we can have the speaker stop and answer them so that the content is more clear, we're happy to do that. We'll also stop periodically. So there's the chat. And then on the next slide, you'll also see that we have the raise hand feature. And that's down near the participant bar, just flag it. It's like a little flag, and I'll be calling on you. If you have any issues with the commands, just send me a message in the chat. We're a small group tonight, so we should be able to take people off of mute, and you'll be able to describe your question to the speaker at various points in the process. So again, we want to make sure it's participatory. So using the chat, we'll be taking questions, looking for those raised hands. I'll call on people periodically. And then also behind the scenes, we have a whiteboard that we're taking comments on, and periodically we'll reveal that so you can see some of the themes that are emerging and how we're taking track of the discussion. So with that, we're going to do a little participation here, and you're going to see a polling question come up. And so what we want to get a sense of, those of you on the line here, what's your interest in farm stays in Santa Barbara County? So if you could tell us, are you someone who owns ag land and might be interested in hosting a farm stay? Are you a county resident wanting to stay informed? Do you live near agricultural lands and have an interest in or concerns about farm stays? Do you own ag land and have concerns about farm stays? Or do you fit another category? So we have waiting for a few more people to respond to the poll. We'll give you a little bit longer. It helps our presenters know kind of how to tailor their answers. But it does look like we have a good distribution of folks. So I think if we could get 3 or 4 more votes in, we will have heard from everybody. Let's see. And in the chat, I'm seeing that we have, we have a land use planner online, and we also have a land use agent who represent, both of them represent rural area clients. Okay, so I'm going to bring the polling to a close. And let's share those results. So you can see we have a good mix of landowners, residents, folks who live near ag lands, those who own ag lands. So you're in the right meeting today to get your questions answered. Okay, so with that, we're going to stop sharing the polling results. And we're going to turn it back to David, and he's going to start our presentation.
Great, thank you, Joan. Let me close my polling here. So there's a lot of interest in farm stays, but not everybody really is familiar with a farm stay. And simply, it's really a farm stay is a working farm or ranch that's partially oriented to visitors and tourism by providing guest accommodations. So some of the benefits of a farm stay is that it provides farmers and ranchers an additional revenue stream, which can help support their agricultural operation. And this in turn has a additional benefit and fosters economic development within our local community. And probably of equal and greater importance, the farm stay provides a real experience for guests and visitors and an opportunity to put a personal face and story to our local farming and ranching, as well as the long history of agricultural stewardship that we have within the county. So just briefly kind of going a little bit back in terms of last year in October, we went to the Board of Supervisors to get direction on the scope of work for the Farmstay Ordinance project. And at that time, the board heard a range of requests from the public, including allowing farm stays on the agricultural one-zone lands and also on smaller, less than 40-acre parcel sizes. And ultimately, the board's directions to staff was to develop an ordinance that would allow farm stays countywide on just the agricultural two-zone lands, and using the existing farm stay ordinance that was adopted for the Gaviota Coast Plan as the starting point for considering a countywide farm stay ordinance. So just briefly, going to highlight what's in the existing Gaviota Coast Farm Stay Ordinance. As stated previously, it has to be located on a farm or ranch where agricultural production is the primary use. The farmstay would have to be located on an agricultural 2 zoned lot that's 40 acre minimum or greater in size. The farmstay itself has a size limitation. It's limited to a maximum of 15 guests and up to 6 accommodated and up to 6 bedrooms. If food service is provided, the food service is only available to the registered guests. And within the Gaviota ordinance, it limits the farmstay to be within an existing dwelling. It would not allow no new structures. And so some of these points that we'll go over in the discussion topics that we covered in our first workshop, but I just wanted to remind either new attendees and some of the attendees from the first workshop what's in the current Gaviota Coast ordinance. And the other aspect that's important for what we're also looking at is allowing farmstays with a low-level permit. And so in Gaviota, it's in the inland areas, it's allowed with a land use permit, and within the coastal zone, it's allowed with a coastal development permit. So quickly, I'm going to just go over some of the things that we covered in our first workshop. Going to go over the summary of the survey results that Joan had mentioned that first was available to the public starting in January, and then go over the 5 different discussion points and some of the comments that we received at the first workshop. And as a reminder, you can always go to our Farmstay webpage on the Planning and Development website, and I have the link here just for convenience. We've got a recording of the first workshop as well as a summary of the comments that we received. So it's always useful if you want to get a refresher on some of the topics discussed and the comments received. It's conveniently located on the website. So with the survey, we sent it out broadly to more than 3,000 of our interested parties email participants. We got a good response, 199 responses, and overall there was a general high level of support for the farmstays and looking forward to allowing that use countywide. 77% general support, and also we were pleased to see that a lot of the 40% of respondents owned agricultural land, and they may be interested in pursuing a farmstay. So we're reaching the right audience. So that was a positive for us. And then similarly on the other side, we asked several questions regarding any concerns about farmstays and compatibility. And overall, 49% of the respondents said that they had little or no concerns regarding the farmstays. And so where there were some concerns, there were common things that people were concerned about: traffic, parking, environmental impacts, compatibility within the rural area. And so we had a good discussion on those compatibility issues that I'll cover. So quickly, just going over some of the survey questions that we had. First question is, what is your interest in farmstays? And this is similar to the poll that we just asked you. So with the broader audience of, in this case, 198 respondents, nearly 40% of the respondents owned agricultural land and may be interested in hosting a farmstay. It's also a good portion of just county residents wanting to stay informed of farmstays and issues and how it proceeds through the process. And then roughly 17% live near agricultural lands and have an interest in or concern regarding the farmstay. Second question is, what is your general level of support for expanding the areas in the county where farmstays are allowed? And again, it's a very high level of general support for expanding the area of the county where farmstays are allowed, 77+%. 11, a low level of respondents said they're generally not supportive of the area of expanding the farmstays. So that was 11.6%. And then similar level, 11% respondents at that time, they had no, they didn't know or they had no opinion at the time. The third question that we had, what aspects of the Farmstay proposal are of greatest interest to you? Highest respondents were that farmstays provide an economic opportunity for the farmers, also provide an educational opportunity to help increase understanding of the county's agriculture, protect and strengthen local farms, and providing visitors a different or unique experience during their visit to Santa Barbara. So all high-level response, supporting opportunities for the farm stay and sort of the values that it can provide both from educational and also economic perspective. Regarding any concerns that people had regarding farm stays. And as I mentioned earlier, nearly 50% had no specific concern, but of those where they listed a specific concern, the highest respondents typically related to bringing people into the rural land for these activities. So they're related to the impact of tourists on adjacent agricultural lands, potential traffic and safety concerns on local roads, as well as other environmental concerns of citing these new uses. And then finally had an open-ended question regarding, do you have any other comments to share related to farm stays? And so we received a lot of just overall positive comments regarding farm stays and the potential benefits. We had several comments requesting to consider farm stays on the smaller Ag 1 zone lands and smaller lots less than 40 acres. Consider Farmstay Ordinance that would allow farm stays in additional structures, or also to look at whether or not RVs or yurts could be a possible use as farm stay. Concerns about parking and traffic, as well as concerns about tourist behavior and potential impacts to ag operation. And as we stated previously, there was a comment related concerns about cannabis. This ordinance does not change the current cannabis regulations that the county has for permitting, but one of the main provisions of the Farmstay Ordinance, as we had stated, is that it has to be located on a farm where the principal use of the property is agriculture, farming or ranching. And so if the principal use is farmstay, the county considers that an agricultural commodity that could potentially qualify for a farmstay. So now I want to just briefly go over the discussion topics that we covered and some of the comments that we had received. And several of these lead into some of the considerations that we'll be looking at as we begin to draft the actual ordinance for the farmstays. So as I mentioned earlier in Gaviota, the farmstay has to be located on a lot of at least 40 acres or larger. And often that, because of just individual site location and constraints, that may not be the best location for the farmstay. And so the discussion centered around ordinance, should it consider allowing a different perspective, look at 40-acre premises. And so premises, the county considers that to be a land holding. It may have multiple parcels, but it's at least the premises collectively of those adjacent parcels is 40 acres. So in this graphic example, if in the Gaviota ordinance, it could only be the farmstay could only be located on the top parcel in red, which is 40 acres plus. However, collectively, all of these parcels from a premises perspective exceed 40 acres. And so if the ordinance were to look at a premises, then the farmstay could be located on one of the other more appropriate parcels within that land holding. The next discussion topic was, should the ordinance consider allowing farm stays to be located in new structures, such as cottages or park trailers? And also with that, excuse me. So the conversation was both for existing structures, so potentially converting an existing permitted building. It might be in association with a winery or another building on an agricultural property that could be converted for that use. So it's both consider existing conversion of structures as well as new structures. And so examples of some of the new structures that many of us have seen, cottages or cabins, use of park trailers, are all examples that could be used for the farm stay. And so a lot of the comments that we received were very supportive of allowing the farm stay to provide flexibility and options for the landowner of considering either converting existing structures or allowing new structures to be used for farm stays. The next topic that we had talked about, wanting to get input and have a discussion on potential compatibility issues or nuisance issues that might be associated with introduction of farm stays within the rural area. So some of the topics of discussion, by this temporary increase in population, we'd see potential increases in noise and traffic. Also concern about not only the on-site agricultural operation, but any concerns whether or not it would have on adjacent agricultural operations. This would be a use, a agritourism related use that would be introduced into the rural lands. And so there was a discussion on should there be, with the introduction particularly of new structures, the visual scale of these structures, and should there be size limits or limits to the number of new structures you could have. And so generally, there wasn't any desire or interest that we heard from having a specific size limit or the limit of the structures, number of structures that could be accommodated, as long as it was meeting the standards that no more than 15 guests accommodated up to 6 bedrooms. And like many of the projects and ordinances that we developed, often a way to address some of the compatibility issues and concerns is through development standards. And so that will be one of the aspects as we start to develop the ordinance. We'll take into consideration the comments that we received and see if there's our proposed, we will be proposing appropriate development standards to address those issues. And then one of the other concepts, particularly if the ordinance does allow conversion of existing structures or new structures, is site location. And so really there was 2 concepts, clustering of the farm stays closer to the existing dwelling. And so that would be an example of the photo on this slide, where those units are clustered close to where the existing roads and infrastructure may be located. And then the concept of allowing one or more farm stay to be remotely sited. And so with the remote siting, there's often additional evaluation issues for siting appropriately. You're going to have to potentially construct additional roads that meet current fire department standards, additional resource impacts, potential introduction of farm stays into high fire hazard areas, additional infrastructure to serve those uses. And so all of those we had talked about, there are unknowns that would have to be looked at, and they could add to additional cost, not only in the implementation of the farm stay operation, but also just in the reviewing of that application once it comes into the planning development department. And then lastly, the last topic that we presented is that because the farm stays would be allowed on agriculturally 2 zoned lands throughout the county, many of those lands are also currently enrolled in the county's agriculture preserve program. So this map depicts an example in the light green, uh, the all of the Ag 2 zone land that's privately held, excluding all the state and federal lands. So roughly, and then in the darker green shows those same Ag 2 zone lands that currently have ag preserve contracts. So roughly 64% of all of the Ag 2 zone lands are currently enrolled in the agriculture preserve program. And so that's relevant because activities on contracted land need to be consistent with the county's uniform rules, which are the rules and regulations, both for enrolling in the agriculture preserve program and then maintaining the contract eligibility. And often, because the primary emphasis is focused on maintaining and promoting the agricultural production on the property, many of the supportive uses can sometimes be more restrictive than the same use that may be allowed on non-contracted land. So one of the parts of this project is that we will also be taking the proposed ordinance to the county's Agriculture Preserve Advisory Committee to receive their input on potential uniform rule text amendments to consider farm stays as compatible use on contracted land. And so just want to acknowledge that that is a step in the process that will need to be addressed.
And David, are you ready for a few questions?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. So there's a question related to the outreach. Has anyone invited the tourism boards and directors to participate in these discussions? These are the folks who will drive the marketing and communication that brings in tourists to the areas that will want to participate in Farmstay. So can you talk a little bit of who those 3,000 emails were, and also if there was anything done for the tourism boards and directors?
Sure. So the 3,000 emails come from the variety of interested parties email lists that the planning development department have from various other projects that people have signed up for. We selected from the agricultural related projects. So we have one for the Ag Enterprise Ordinance, Cannabis Ordinance, Gaviota Coast Plan, and we have a general agriculture email list. And so those are sort of known entities of people that have expressed interest. Very good point. I don't know if any of the tourist boards are on those lists, but we will definitely be seeking out those contacts to encourage them to participate and be involved in this project moving forward.
Okay, thanks, David. So you had just shown a map of the AG2 parcels, and the same person has a question. Is there a list of the AG2 parcels that qualify for this program? Were these property owners reached out to see if they have interest in the program?
As far as the lands that would qualify, I guess it varies depending upon if you looked at the Gaviota Coast starting point or where we think we're moving forward, because then you would have to look at not just parcels greater than 40 acres, but you'd have to look at land holdings and potential eligibility. And that's sort of, I think, your lowest common denominator of eligibility of Ag 2 zone lands, and then you have to look at other factors. But as we move forward, all of the agricultural 2 landowners and surrounding agricultural landowners will also be notified at various stages, particularly when we begin environmental review, and then when we move into the decision maker hearings. So we will be creating those notice mailing lists as well.
Okay, thank you. And then the last thing, just this commenter has a question about the survey still being active, and that survey was closed in January and was used to inform the first workshop. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so it's not active and they can't send it out anymore. And they just have some general comments about, potential interest of others with smaller parcels who would probably love to participate in the program and bring in some tourism dollars. So I'll just let this commenter know. We'll note that comment, and you'll get an additional opportunity to comment further as we move on through the agenda. And again, if others have any comments or questions, use the chat, and I'll stop David and our other presenter, Jason, periodically as we move through. Okay, so David, back to you.
So that was a quick tour of the topics that we covered. And I think a lot of you participated in that workshop. So thank you for the great discussion that we had in the comments. And so some of the discussion topics also kind of lead to potential, where is this ordinance potentially moving towards as we develop it? And so what we heard on several points that kind of relate to what we're going to include in the ordinance. The first one we talked about earlier, consider including the 40-acre premises concept for qualifying instead of a 40-acre lot. And also consider farm stays provide more flexibility, allow it in an existing dwelling, conversion of existing structure for the farm stay, and also allow farm stays within new structure. And then, so all of those features, we've heard support for, and so staff is going to be including options for those in the draft ordinance for consideration. In addition to that, we discussed the concept of remote siting and clustered. And so we will look at including an option, a permit option for remote siting of one or more farm stays. And then traditionally, as we do, and I think importantly, to address concerns about compatibility and other issues, the ordinance will consider the comments and try to incorporate those as development standards for the Farmstay Ordinance. So just wanted to kind of bring together or move forward to where we are today, is that at least the dialogue that we've had, which was productive, is helping to shape what we're going to be looking at in the draft ordinance. And with these issues that we covered just on this slide, I think they're useful and valuable options that we'll be presenting to the decision makers. So just wanted to touch upon that as how your comments can be relatable into what goes into the ordinance. And we kind of covered the Q&A, the general Q&A, but now I want to turn it over to our keynote speaker tonight. As I mentioned earlier in the introductions, we got the great pleasure of having a guest speaker. We've got Jason Johnston, who's an environmental health supervisor from our Santa Barbara County Public Health Department. And so he's going to be providing a perspective from environmental health on food service, water, and wastewater, and as they relate to various farm stay options. And so I'll turn it over now to Jason for his presentation.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to probably be at the higher level of review for most of these things, just because as we look at the different options, can go different ways. But this is a general overview of the three categories. We can go to the next slide. In the Health and Safety Code, or the Retail Food Code, agricultural homestay is defined similar to what the existing Gaviota homestay ordinance has, which is a maximum of 6 guest rooms with 15 guests per occupancy period. It's transient accommodations. Food can be provided to registered guests only. There is no defined meal times when the price of the food would be included in those overnight accommodations. This would be a restricted food service facility, so bed and breakfast is a common other restricted food service facility, although it's further limited in what can actually be provided. And then again, lodging and meals is incidental to the agricultural operation. It would be a commercial food facility or a retail food facility. So food would be prepared and served in a permitted facility, a permitted kitchen. So that would require plan review prior to construction operation, and it would have an ongoing health permit. As a restricted food service facility, the requirements aren't as strict as a commercial kitchen, but they are very similar. Certain areas they're exempted. Most areas are not. Again, all food facilities are driven by the menu and the proposed food and preparation operations that are going on. So that would be part of it. And that would drive both the equipment and finishes that would be required, as well as some of the wastewater that we'll discuss further on. But again, it would have an annual health permit. So there would be an annual permit with fees. It'd be based on square footage of preparation and a shared dining area if that was attached. It would have an ongoing routine inspection, as well as if there were complaints related to foodborne illness or some other sanitation or safety issue, that would also have an inspection. So now we're going to move on to water and wastewater. And again, what we already just mentioned, both existing dwellings as well as new structures or conversions of structures. So water, we'd be looking at both from a county code perspective as well as from state codes and regulations. Things to consider with water is that in state regulations and in federal, a public water system is a water system that serves 25 or more people who use that water system for more than 60 days a year. So that'd be the existing users on the parcels, as well as any guests who come on site. So that doesn't mean that if you have 10 people working on that property and now you have 15 guests, it automatically puts it as a public water system. That 60 days per year is important to remember. Either way, we'd be looking at the existing users and population and the existing structures, the actual system's capacity. So how many wells are there, what their source is or what their yield is, as well as any storage. And a thing to note is that all food facilities are required to meet the standards for a transient non-community water system. So while they wouldn't necessarily be permitted if they're under the 25 or more people, it would still have to meet the water standards, which would mean that there would be some initial water quality testing as well as ongoing water quality testing to verify the potability requirements. Go to the next one. Actually, I'll go back really quick.
Jason, while you're still back on this slide, if you could explain the 25 or more on a public system. I know the first time I heard it didn't quite, if you could just walk us through that calculation again.
So I'll more broadly discuss what a system is and then move on to that question. The system is anywhere from the well to the tap, basically, and everything connected to that piping. So if there's several wells connected to several structures, that's all one system. And so if there are 25 individuals who are using that system on a day for more than 60 days, it'd be a public water system. So if you had 15 guests for more than 60 days or nights, and you have 10 people who live or work on that parcel and they use that water, that'd be 25 people. So if I guess there's two ways around being a public water system. You have any number of people over 25 use that water system for less than 60 days, or you always stay under that 25 count. Does that answer the question?
Let's see. I think I haven't seen anything come back in the chat, so I
Okay.
think you might be good to go.
Okay.
Okay, he
Now
has
we're gonna
he
move.
has a few others, but let's go through this more, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Okay. On the wastewater side, portable toilets or chemical toilets are only allowed for temporary uses. So for a dwelling or occupancy or a permanent building or structure, portable toilets would not be adequate. They wouldn't meet adequate needs for wastewater. Our review process for an existing structure where there's no change in flow, so it's an existing residence going from a residence to that transient occupancy where there's no changes in the bedrooms, we would still be looking at it from if it actually meets minimum standards. That's an evaluation. Or if you were going to add on to a structure, you're going to enlarge a room, add a living room, a non bedroom. If any of those don't apply, to where you're putting a new system in, or you're adding bedrooms or increasing flow, so you're adding on it mainly be related to bedrooms. Our fees for those are $255 for an application fee and then $161 per hour. We don't have good data for what an average one takes hour-wise. It really depends on the plan submitted and how much back and forth there is. Every site is very different, so it can open up a lot of different avenues. But we did discuss before this the water system, and that brings me back to connections. If you were to do a clustered or new construction where you're going to have some dwellings like cottages that were bedrooms only and had a standalone restroom shower, that would be one water connection. In the land use codes, any water system with 4 or more connections, so a residence, a commercial barn, a ag employee dwelling, and a accessory dwelling unit. I'm just throwing out a couple. That's 4 connections. That wouldn't require a minor conditional use permit. If you were to add a 5th structure, that would put it into a state small water system, which is a county regulated system. And it wouldn't meet the thresholds for a public water system, but it would be a state small. So these all can go several different ways depending on layouts. But from a water wastewater perspective, a standalone restroom shower facility, and if you're going to do a commercial kitchen too, if those were all in one structure, that'd be one water connection, would likely be served by one septic system or on-site wastewater treatment system. And just a thought to have out there.
So Jason, just before you leave the wastewater, I thought one of the things that you had mentioned to me earlier may be of interest to our attendees as well, in terms of options for wastewater. Typically in the rural lands, we've got septic system and leach field. The age of that system is highly variable. And then I guess there's 2 scenarios: adding more if you have farmstay guests that are within the dwelling and they're using that same existing system, or kind of scenario number 2, if new structures or a converted structure was the farmstay, and some of the things to consider whether or not those new structures could be hooked up to the existing system. What are some of the limitations?
So systems are generally designed for the minimum required to serve that use. They're right at the code requirements. So I lost my, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
please go ahead.
They're designed right to code, and that's generally, and code has changed over years. So depending on the age of the structure, it likely isn't a code. So if they were going to add new bedroom units or something like that, or add a new structure, the existing system would likely be undersized for adding a new structure onto that system. Also, systems have several components. You have the tank as well as the disposal field. Um, Depending on the construction, soils, the actual use of the system over time, some systems last 40, 50, 60 plus years. Others that, for various reasons, have much shorter lifespans. And so it likely would not be feasible to connect new structures to an existing system. We likely need to have its own system, whether that's a new system serving just those structures or a new system designed for however many structures you want tied in based on the configuration.
Great. Yeah, that's helpful.
This slide covers the overall EHS fees. For the food facility, annual permits again are based on square footage. 391 is for less than 500 square feet of prep, cook, on-site dining, and then 842, and there is one in between there, is I think up to 3,000 square feet. 500 to 1,500 square feet is 556 per year. And again, plan review is 255 plus 161 per hour for any construction related to that. On the food side, we also discussed host kitchens internally. Host kitchens are limited to 4 hours per 12-hour period, and those are really designed for direct sales from the catering operation to the buyer. Those also are 391, but likely not applicable to this type of situation. Wastewater, we discussed those fees again. And then water, the plan review depends on the system. If it is a public system or a state small, it is 255 plus 161 per hour. If it is a private system, so either a single parcel or multi-parcel system, it's a different fee. On public water systems, for non-community water systems, there is an annual fee, and that's 1,654. And those also have reporting to the state and various inspections versus a private water system, which would be regulated at the construction. It wouldn't necessarily have ongoing water inspections, but it would be required to report as long as it was under the state small or public system. It would have quarterly bacterial tests from a faucet in one of those units. It would have ongoing nitrate and nitrate testing. Nitrites would be every year. Nitrite would be every year. Nitrates would be every year. Nitrates would be every 3 years. And then there'd be some general testing, which likely already occurred when the original system was constructed.
So Jason, those testing, does the owner submit those to the state or to or do they just have to have the reports on hand and they don't necessarily submit the reports?
So if it was a non-public system and we're just meeting the potability requirements for a food facility, they would have them on hand and we would look at them during the annual food inspection.
Okay.
If it is a public water system, then they would be submitting to us as the state's delegate to review those. And they would actually be, the lab that would be running those samples would be direct reporting it into the state's database.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Okay, great. So I think now we're going to turn it over to Joan, and we're going to have an opportunity for general question and answer, specifically if you have any other additional questions or comments regarding what Jason has provided tonight. So.
Okay. Thanks, David. I'm going to start with a question for David, and then it seems like there are several questions for you. We should have waited a little bit longer to give people time to type. So I'll ask the first question for Jason, and the person just wanted to understand, how is it that portable toilets have been relied on for tourists visiting downtown Los Olivos? You know, thousands per month for decades, but that they won't work for this small concept. Can you speak to the portable toilets?
Yeah, that's an ongoing issue in that area. There's various wastewater issues in Los Olivos, and the changes that have occurred in the land use of those structures, and not having adequate public facilities. The Los Olivos CSD is working towards doing a sewer system for that area, because there just is not adequate dispersal space to have a public system, or have a public restroom facility in that area. I can't speak to why they've been allowed for decades. That's before I was with environmental health. But we are hopefully working towards a solution so that there is a community sewer system in that area, so that those are gone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jason. Now, most of the questions I have, I think, David, they're yours. I have two people that want to hear, has there been any discussion about allowing farm stays on a premise or property smaller than 40 acres? So can you share some of that discussion?
Yes, as I was kind of recapping when we went to the Board of Supervisors last October to get direction on the scope of what we should include in this ordinance as we move forward. They did hear similar comments from the public at that time to consider allowing farm stays on the Ag 1 zone properties, as well as on parcels that were smaller than 40 acres. And ultimately, they did not go in that direction. Their direction was to consider this Farmstay Ordinance update only on Agricultural 2 zone lands, and to use the Gaviota Farmstay Ordinance sort of as the starting point basis, which has the 40-acre minimum size. One of the reasons within that was to try to get something adopted as soon as we can, so that more landowners have the opportunity to take advantage of it. It doesn't mean that that option is forever precluded. I could see a subsequent effort to, if this is successful, I could see that there could be a potential ordinance to consider farm stays on the smaller Ag 1 parcels. But as far as where we are right now, it's really based on the board's direction to limit the ordinance currently that we're working on to those Ag 2 zone lands and 40 acre or greater.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just, you know, what's on the screen, what you're seeing is a digital whiteboard, and we're taking comments and questions based on different sections and topics. And the idea is to just help us keep track, and remind people that we have gotten to certain questions. It may also prompt you to ask some additional questions. So let's see, David, the next one is for you. Under new structures, will you be considering such things as yurts as well as buildings of no consequence, i.e. under 120 square feet? Meaning, can a landowner avoid permitting a new structure if it's a yurt or something under 120 square feet?
Um, So we had talked about that the new structures would need to be served by water or wastewater. Now, certainly one option is that you could have a central restroom shower facility that could meet some of those. We are still researching with our building and safety division regarding yurts. And I think there was also a question last workshop of whether or not sort of Airstream trailers could potentially be used. So we're still researching that. But we don't want to confuse this with sort of a camping situation. The kind of parallel project that's underway, the Agriculture Enterprise Ordinance, will be looking at various small scale camping options. But yeah, as far as we are still conducting some additional research on sort of the range of structures that would be considered for use as a farmstay.
Okay, thank you, David. We have a question about the taxes to be collected. So I don't know if you're able to answer this yet. Will the tax be collected same as the TOT for short-term rentals? And if so, will it be a same or a different percentage?
I can answer that. So yes, so the farm stay use is considered a transient occupancy use, similar to a hotel, motel stay, and also the homestay or short-term rentals. And so the operator would be required to register with the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office, essentially agreement to pay transient occupancy, collect and pay transient occupancy taxes. There's a county-wide tax that all of those uses is the same. And so that I believe it may be off a 0.5%. I think it's like 12 or 12.5%. So it's the same fee that all other transient occupancy uses are required to charge.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from a commenter. Is the focus on this process going to be primarily on fees? We've been sharing, Jason has shared some of the information on the fees. David, I don't know if you can speak to that or if they have an additional clarifying question.
Well, the main reason why we want to at least touch upon it is just to be as information for potential owners that may be interested in farm stays, that there are fees associated with these uses, and to ensure that they're safe and adequate water and wastewater and particularly food service if that's part of your operation. So it's really just disclosure and information. It's not a focus of what our ordinance is not proposing any changes to the fees. Those are really the fees that the board has set for environmental health service operations.
Okay. So we have a comment and a question related to having the food service structure attached. Given current conditions, all food service has to be conducted outside due to COVID, meaning picnic tables are under an awning or such. So requiring an attached food service area might be in conflict with other regulations and programming. Is there any thinking about how the COVID requirements influence what's going on here?
So there wouldn't be any requirement for attached dining, but the food preparation has to be in an enclosed area. Um, Vermin, flies would be the main consideration there, along with dust or something else contaminating both workspaces as well as the food itself or adulterating the food, whether that's prepared, raw, otherwise. Um, so dining itself wouldn't be necessarily have to be there, but the actual prep and cook area would need to be enclosed, and that's same as existing food facilities.
Okay, thank you, Jason. We have a kind of a comment and a clarifying statement related to farm stays and homestays. So the commenter says that the county will not allow farm stays on all Ag 2 land. However, homestays are allowed on all Ag 1 land and in accordance with 35.42.193. They're saying that Ag 2 land should allow homestays where farm stays are not allowed or appropriate. And they're suggesting this as a minor change that could be added when the Farmstay Ordinance is approved. So can you speak to anything related to homestays versus farm stays?
Yeah, several years ago when the county was considering adopting both the short-term rental and homestay ordinances, the conversation of should these uses be allowed on agricultural land, was a healthy discussion. Where the board landed on was they only allowed homestays. So the homestay is where the owner or long-term lessee is residing on the property during your short-term rental, so to speak. The homestay is not a farm stay. It really is it's still a transient occupancy use that's less than 30 days. But it has no relationship or requirement to agriculture. They are both lodging. And so part of the reason why the board, once they limited homestays only to Ag 1, there was the question, well, what about Ag 2 lands? And so even at that time in our work program, the board was aware of that the Farmstay Ordinance was sort of in the queue and would be moving forward and to provide that lodging opportunity to the agricultural 2 lands. And so that's kind of where we are now. And then the Farmstay, as I mentioned, it's similar because it's a lodging opportunity. It's a transient occupancy use, but really it's sort of the relationship to those agricultural lands. That's the primary use. It has that added benefit of landowner-guest relationship and educating the guests and visitors regarding the agriculture operations. So they're similar in terms of their functionality, but really different.
Okay, and here's a short question. Don't we have AG1 parcels that are 40 acres?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we did mention at the first workshop, so one of the aspects of this project and many ordinances is that we are required to look at, do environmental review of those ordinances. And so we had mentioned that one option that we may look at in the environmental review phase is to consider farm stays on Ag 1 lands that are premises greater than 40 acres. And so it may potentially be looked at as an alternative in the environmental review phase. But just, yes, specifically to your question, there are land holdings, both individual parcels and premises of 40 acres or greater in the Ag 1 zone.
Okay, well, David, we'll give you a break. We'll go to Jason with our next question. What is considered adequate water per person in gallons per week, month, or year?
And from the county code perspective, every structure or every connection is required to have a source providing 3 gallons per minute. So if you had 2 structures, you would have to have a well that could yield 6 gallons per minute. There are some creeks and streams in the county for some of the public water systems, but generally it's a well. And based on the gallons per minute that the well source yield test shows, that would kind of determine how many structures it can serve or if multiple wells would be needed. From the public water system perspective, maximum daily demand would be taking the month that yields the greatest amount of water usage. And again, we're only looking at the domestic usage, not any irrigation, unless it's metered all from the same. So if the meter's on the well, then it would capture irrigation water usage. But if the meter was after the well was split, you would take however much gallons per month are used, divided by the days of the month, and that would give you the maximum daily demand. So generally in our area, it's August, September, October are those months that we see maximum flow for that month, and that's how that is determined. But it's not a per person calculation.
Okay. Let's see. I hope I have a follow-up question from the same person, but I think the latter half of Jason's answer may have responded to that. We've a question. How long will it take Farmstay to get adopted? And in the interim, will they be able to operate with a conditional use permit, or will people have to wait?
So I'll answer the latter part of that question. So currently the only area that you can apply for Farmstay is within the Gaviota Coast Plan area. The use requires a permit, and so you would not be able to operate the Farmstay without the permit. So looking forward, as we talked about, we're looking at a potential range of permit options. One consideration is maybe we look at if you're conducting a farmstay within an existing dwelling that is actually lower than a land use permit. Maybe it's a zoning clearance is the appropriate permit. And then potentially if you're going to be on the other end of that spectrum, if you're going to be remotely siting one or more new structures as the farmstay, maybe that's maybe it's a minor conditional use permit because of the additional environmental review. So the time to permit all of those is varied. And again, a lot of it relates to the complexity of what's being proposed and how that's going to be accommodated on the individual site. But the land use permit putting cannabis land use permits aside, a typical land use permit in terms of having a complete application would take several months potentially to approve, and longer if it's a minor conditional use permit. Zoning clearance would be a shorter term than that. Again, a lot of it is depending upon it's a straightforward application and use, and often what we try to do for a zoning clearance category is create a checklist of information that needs to be provided. It helps the landowner get everything they need ahead of time, and that can shorten the review period. So it varies by the permit type.
Okay, thanks, David. So we have a question asking if you could discuss the cost of various permits on the table to the landowner.
I don't have that information directly. Again, my inadequate answers is variable, but I will try to get some information and post it to our website that can kind of give a range of typical permitting time and cost for the different levels. And so hopefully maybe next week, look to the Farmstay webpage and we'll try to get something posted for you.
Okay. We have a comment about what P&D charges per hour for planners. So there's a permit cost, and then are there some where there's an hourly cost for planners? And can you share that number?
Well, the hourly cost, I mean, some permits have a fixed fee. Other permits, the more as you get more involved in discretionary, often there's a deposit sort of and then it's charged based on the time. And all of those during application submittal, the owner receives sort of an estimate of the cost and time. But again, I think a lot of it is the individual complexity of the project, but as I mentioned, we'll try to get posted on our website at least some general statistics that may be helpful to prospective operators.
Okay. Okay, good. So you'll be providing more details so people can find out where in the range their scenario might fit in terms of what they might expect if they pursued this.
Yeah.
Okay. Just waiting for a few more questions to come in through the chat, or if we have any raised hands, if anyone finds it might be easier to share their question verbally, we're happy to take you off mute. But we've covered, and I'll also we'll just pause and give folks a few minutes to type in their questions. But David, we've covered a wide range of topics so far. I think you've been able to give some additional clarification of what was learned from the workshop and the survey, and then how it was built upon to continue the direction that the county is going in as it follows the guidance provided by the Board of Supervisors.
John, I think we have a hand raised by Mr.
Let's
Park.
see. Oh, yes. Okay, John Park. John, if you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead. If you would, if you could introduce yourself to the group, Mr. Park.
Yes, I'm a person who's had a lot of interest in this for some time and conducted some workshops, gosh, about over a year and a half ago that were sponsored by We Watch, kind of try to kick this in gear. And I'm the planning commissioner for the 3rd District. As I continue to talk to a lot of agricultural landowners, many are interested in small campgrounds. And it seems logical to me that that's a component of the agricultural enterprise ordinance, not farm stays. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree. You know, there is the parallel project, our Ag Enterprise Ordinance, and that is looking at small scale campgrounds.
So then a question comes to mind that I haven't really thought very much about, and that is, can a single property have both? Would we allow a 6-unit farm stay, but then the person could also have a small campground that might have the yurts and so on and so forth? And when I talk to many landowners, they're interested in sort of a mixture of, oh, I have some existing cottages, but I'd also like to have some yurts and some airstreams and so on and so forth. So how do you see that interplay working? That would it be an either or? You have a farm stay or a small campground, or maybe you could have both? Anything you've given some thought to?
Yeah, no, for those that may have also attended our workshop last week on Ag Enterprise Ordinance, which has sort of a list of potential uses. You know, in the comment came up, you know, can a landowner do many of these on the list? So then you could also add in farm stay. So looking at sort of the cumulative stacking of these uses is one of the things that we are aware of and that we're wanting to take a look at, not only through the ordinance, but also when each of the projects are looking at, you know, what are the cumulative effects of these on, you know, potential impacts. I would say that, one of the lenses to look at that is at what point does it, as on the entirety of the property, are you moving away from agriculture being the primary land use to these, cumulative stacking of incidental uses that may be in the more commercial arena. And so I think that's one lens to look at it. But certainly, I think, as you had mentioned, Mr. Park, you're going to see interest kind of the full range. Some landowners may only want to do one use, whether it be a farm stay or small scale campground. And then others may want to do a mix of things, or many of the wineries may want to look at, a variety of different things that, maybe a farm stay and maybe some uses, from the Ag Enterprise Ordinance. So it's an important thing, and I think an important conversation that we need to continue in terms of these, layering of uses.
Okay, any other questions, Mr. Park?
No, that's fine. And I appreciate this conversation tonight. Very well presented.
Okay, well, thank you, David and Jason. So we have a few more questions. I think we have a participant who needs some clarification. So where are we in that? You're not accepting applications. Where are we in the process?
Yes, there are no applications to be had or filled out unless you're in Gaviota. Gaviota, as I mentioned, is the only area of the county where farm stays are allowed, and you can apply today for a farm stay. But for the rest of the county, really, where we are right now is sort of one of the first steps. Is we're seeking to develop a draft ordinance and get that approved, and then once it's approved, at that point, landowners will have the opportunity to apply. The caveat, as always, is that the coastal portion of our county, any of the ordinance amendments need to be certified by the Coastal Commission, so that's going to take longer. But at least for the inland area, once the Board of Supervisors adopts this farm stay ordinance, it takes effect, within 30 days, and so landowners can, track the progress. We'll kind of go over in the next steps in the schedule, but in general, we're hoping to get this to the Board of Supervisors before the end of the year, hopefully in fall sometime, for potential adoption.
Okay, thank you. So little kind of from a historical perspective, we have a participant who would like to know, I think this topic came up over a decade ago, and they'd like to understand maybe why it's taken us so long to get to where we are.
The topic of farm stays?
Well, yeah, they mentioned an Ag 2 permit for farm stays being promised about a decade ago.
Well, I mean, there's various projects that are, talked about and considered. I mean, one of the, in different priorities for the Board of Supervisors to fund and move forward. Farm stays, really, I guess in the more recent era, I think the conversation developed in Gaviota, and the board, thought that was a valued use, and so they adopted those changes. But they also recognized that it'd be valuable to the rest of the county, and so really projects and different ordinances, they need to work their way through our annual work program and get funding by the Board of Supervisors. And depending upon managing different priorities and challenges, sometimes those very good projects, it just takes time before they actually reach that final hurdle and get funding and into an adopted budget. But rather than looking on the past, I think it's a very positive thing that the board is supporting, and I think they wanted to keep this focused to move it forward so it could get adopted soon, and so that landowners, it would be an option for those interested to supplement their farming and ranching operation.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. So just checking to see if there's anyone who wants to ask their question verbally, or we'll give it a little bit of time to give people to enter any additional questions in the chat. I think I've gotten all of them. And again, we have our notes of what we've covered. This helps our team keep track of what you asked. Just a few on the food service, then a number of questions and comments on wastewater, and then, quite a few for David as it relates to different aspects of the ordinance that has been proposed. Let's see. So I'm not seeing anything else coming in through the chat, and I don't see any hands up. So David, how about if you go back to the PowerPoint, and we may be finishing up early if there aren't any more comments or questions coming in.
Okay, great. Yeah, and as always, if you have additional comments and questions, you can send them to my email, or you can also go to our webpage for some additional information, and my contact information will be on one of the concluding slides, so you can get that.
And David, you should just be able to, I can stop sharing, and you can grab the screen and open it up.
Okay.
And just while David's getting that, he has sent his email is in the chat, and also the web link has been set in the chat, and we have a thank you message from one of the participants for the outreach and for sharing the information. So yeah, let's get to our next step slide.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, we're good.
Right. So yeah, just kind of, so this is our second last formal workshop, and so we're going to continue moving the process forward. We're going to continue to meet with the Agriculture Advisory Committee to get input. Also, I believe in May, we're hoping to go to the Agriculture Preserve Advisory Committee to get their input on farmstays as compatible use on contracted land, and any suggested uniform rule text amendments that they may recommend. And then continue revising the draft ordinance and starting our CEQA environmental review late spring. In terms of moving forward, as I mentioned, we're hoping to get to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors this fall for the adoption hearings, and all of the, both through the environment opportunities for additional public input and involvement during the CEQA review, and certainly during Planning Commission hearings and Board of Supervisors hearings. Certainly the decision makers will be seeking and valuing the community's input. And then, as I mentioned, just finally, for the portion of the coastal zoning ordinance that we would be amending, we would need to, after the board adopts that, it would need to be submitted to the Coastal Commission for certification, which can take up to 12 to 15 months additional time. It's unfortunate, but so that's sort of our next near-term steps. And we thank you for all of your valuable input, and continue to follow the progress. And if you have not already, you can join our mailing list. There's a link on our website. You can also contact and send me an email. On the next slide is my contact information, dlackey@countyofsb.org. So feel free to send me an email if you have questions or comments, or if you have difficulty signing up for the interested parties email list, just give me your information and I can do that. And as always, you can visit our website for posting of additional information regarding the Farmstay Ordinance. So I wanted to thank everyone for spending some time with us this evening. And thank you, Jason Johnston, for the valuable information regarding environmental health services and different perspectives related to that relate to potential farm stay uses. And so again, I want to thank everyone for their comments and attendance tonight, and please follow the progress of our project as we move forward. So thank you.
Okay, and thank you to David and Jason for doing an excellent job responding to all of the questions and providing high quality presentations. We appreciate your time. And again, as David offered, if you have any follow-up questions or anything specific to your property or your scenario in terms of what you're thinking about a farm stay, he'd be happy to walk you through it and let you know some of the things you might want to pay attention to. So with that, we appreciate everyone's participation. The webinar and the questions and answers have been recorded, and they should be on the county's website, probably either end of the week or early next. So again, thank you for your participation, and we are officially adjourned. Good night.